Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Svelte Radio. Today, we don't have another guest, but we do have some really fun news. SvelteKit is in public beta. Woo! But before we get started, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Kevin. I run a site called Svelte School, and I work at a company called BuddyBase.
I'm Sean. I guess I should post on Svelte Society Twitter for a living. And my side hustle is I work at temporal.io.
Hi, I'm Antony. I am the CTO of Beyonc, which is a booking ecosystem for the tourism and leisure industry in the UK. And I am also a Svelte maintainer and SvelteKit maintainer, I guess, by virtue.
So we're getting information straight from the source here.
The maintainers of both, like they're essentially the same maintainers, right? Like it's one project.
Well, to an extent, there is a core maintenance team, but there's actually a few more people on Kit that aren't officially kind of maintainers, just because they've just had a specific kind of vision for something to happen, and we found that valuable, so they've been added to the fray. And they're kind of becoming maintainers because once you get involved, you kind of contribute to everything. And in fact, some of those have become Vite maintainers as well, which is
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I guess there were there like a couple of issues that needed to be solved in Vite or Vite or whatever you call it?
Yes, there still are actually. There's a few issues in Vite just because obviously it's quite new. It didn't really have SSR until Kit came along, so a lot of the SSR stuff has been provided by the Kit maintainers. It kind of made sense, I suppose.
So what's new here? What does it actually mean to be in public beta? Because the repo's been open for like a week or two, maybe. But it's been closed, right? Or rather, like you can't comment, you can't open issues, you can't do PRs.
It was closed to the barbarians.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because there's a couple of issues in there that have said stuff like, I can't remember the exact wording, but open it to the rabble, etc., etc. It's quite funny because people dig around and find those. Obviously, all in jest. It's just quite amusing. So a public beta or beta to us kind of is. We wanted to do this earlier, but obviously, when you're trying to build something that's kind of on the edge and it's a bit new, you end up making a lot of pretty huge architectural changes. So we didn't want to give access to anything because by the time someone raised an issue, it might not even be the direction we're heading in anymore. So the first opening of the repo so that people could actually see the code, the actual source code, was at the point where actually we ran out of GitHub build minutes because it was a private repository and you get limited. So that's why you open it up. It's not the reason, right? But it expedited by a couple of days, maybe. Yeah. But it's quite kind of funny to say that's the reason. But yeah, I mean, it basically was the reason. Within
minutes, it was leaked online.
Yeah, that was to give people who'd been pining it, chomping at the bit about, getting a bit more access to viewing how it works underneath, so they can understand the issues they're seeing, could actually see that stuff. Again, it was something we probably wanted to make a longer period just to get that initial feedback without having to manage. Because once you open issues, you've got to start managing the issues and maintaining the issues, and they get open so fast. We've already gained 20 issues or something, and it's just another thing to keep on top of. So it was holding off that a little bit until we had complete clarity over how it worked and what it did, and stopped some huge major things or whatever that were popping up. The beta is basically opening issues, opening that and allowing feedback on actual issues and triaging and all that kind of stuff. And it's cool because a couple of people have actually jumped up to help us triage those issues. In fact, one of them is just called Jay. I don't know what the full name is, but thanks, Jay.
Jacob, I think.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, he's gone for his name. That's really useful.
Isn't he the guy that made the Svelte adder stuff?
So we talk about Jacob Babbage here.
Yeah, isn't that the same guy?
I don't know. That's news to me if it is. Maybe it is.
I think so. But I might be wrong.
Oh, okay. Well, look anyway.
Yeah.
So, Kev, sorry, you were saying?
No, I was just saying, so does this being in public beta mean that the APIs are kind of locked down? Like they won't change too much, or What's
So
the reason?
yes and no. I actually changed the API yesterday. I did a PR that removed app utils. Well, I mean, it's sort of changing APIs. It's additive, right? So it's not like I've broken anything or removed anything. What I've done is I've split the app utils package, which was it became a kind of dump for some file system stuff and some HTTP stuff. We realized we really needed it only in two places and they were quite separate. So we moved the bits for that into here, the bits for that to there. And the other thing about that is because we've kind of gone CommonJS to ESM for adapters and then back to CommonJS because certain providers can't, pass ESM stuff. You have to export and compile things differently when they're dependencies of ESM or CommonJS projects. So all the adapters that were relying on the CommonJS stuff stopped working because they were in ESM and vice versa.
Right.
So anyway, that's a change, and it's added some builder stuff it's added some file system stuff to the builder, and wherever you want to use the HTTP stuff, you have to import it separately. So it is an API change of a sort, but it's not like, oh, you have to go and fix everything now. It's more additive, so you could use it from a different location.
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of locking down the APIs, they're by no means locked down. Definitely not before we reach a kind of RC stage and start versioning properly. But they're pretty good right now. There is discussions about how we'll probably talk about it later, but how middleware gets handled because people are missing Express middleware already and Polka middleware.
Yeah.
So we're just having some discussions internally about how to resolve that.
So how do you actually get started with SvelteKit?
How do you get started? You npm init SvelteKit next.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, so easy.
And so one discussion we had yesterday was that we're going to potentially remove the original Svelte template because it's easier for people, I think, if you have a single way in. So SvelteKit should be the way that you build things in Svelte, whether it be a hybrid SSR SPA application, whether it be a PWA, whether it be an AMP site, whether it be a component, anything at all. The idea being that you'll always use Kit. You'll always do the same command, and it'll be that npm init create svelte at next. Sorry, npm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It makes it easier for newcomers to get started quickly, right? And you get the like the blessed router, I suppose, right?
Yeah, you do, and that's one thing that might be a holdback because not everyone wants that route to that router. So we're considering options for that right now. But yeah, if you've got a single way to do something, it makes a lot more sense, I think, for people. If you've got 100 different ways to start a project, you kind of get confused. So it's about keeping it simple.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I would not maybe remove the template because it's still very useful for me to learn where Svelte stops and where the other tooling begins. And I think, that was one of the benefits of the original Svelte template, which was right from the start, everybody could see the webpack or rollup config. It's not hidden away from you, which means that, if you have a certain level of comfort with these configs, then you can modify it yourself and have full control. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, so that is one concern. So what the plan, I think, is maybe that the Svelte template will become an example project inside the rollup plugin, because effectively that's the reasoning where you might want to use that template is if you want full control over the rollup configuration stuff.
Yeah,
it's just misleading as the kind of starter because it's not the recommended way that people start stuff now.
Was there any debate over the amount that you scaffold out when you do npm init svelte at next? Because something I noticed was, you do add like the optional svelte config .cjs, which is an interesting choice. but then you don't add some other pretty standard things like a error layout or other file formats that maybe scaffolded in like a standard Sapper app.
So yes, there's a couple of things here. The first one is the CJS extension on the Svelte config. I believe that's due to a restriction in Visual Studio Code that it can't read ESM config files. That's what I was hearing yesterday, that I understand. And it's something they've, I think, fixed. And so soon maybe we can drop that. So the other thing, the scaffolding. So when you create, obviously the goal is to keep the build as simple as possible. It's a bit more complex with Vite and stuff because, we don't have much control really over what Vite does and builds out. And what it does is some pretty complex like wiring of stuff to make it a smooth experience. So whilst trying to keep it as simple as possible, we are also at the same time cognizant that it's a lot more than just cloning a repo, and it's not like a couple of lines anymore. And I think it's something we'll always look to address, but there's no guarantees yet. In terms of what that template does from the get-go, it's a balance between making something where you've got an immediate option when you install, like you have with TypeScript and all that sort of stuff, where you declare what type of thing you're building. And it's a decision between that and also maybe when you build that one thing, it can do anything without having to say up front what you're building. So it's somewhere in the middle of those with a goal to push as far as we can towards minimal setup in that CLI, and then you've got something that can become whatever it needs to be.
So have you guys? I'm sure this has come up, but like, have you guys considered just having a CLI where you can initiate like a bunch of different types of projects, like a SvelteKit or a regular one, or maybe even a Routify one or a Elder.js or?
So we wouldn't build a CLI that starts to build external projects, because it puts the burden of maintenance for those projects upon us, which is something we definitely don't want. However, that would be a great project for a community person to do. But I think the other reason though is, and I'm not saying that people should always just use ours and not use any other things, because I think Elder.js and Routify are fantastic. But our goal is to provide something where you can build a Svelte thing with as little overhead of should I be using Routify? Should I be using Elder? Whatever else. The idea is to go from your keyboard, type a few characters, and that you've got a Svelte thing, and it can be whatever it wants to be, without having to decide up front what your architecture might look like. So we're more likely to move in that direction than trying to build here's a big, huge list of options that you can create.
Are you guys thinking about stuff like picking what adapters you want and things like that in the CLI? Or?
Well, so the adapters is a weird one. They're intentionally simple so that the community can build them. There are a few adapters in there which, for example, is not particularly well known, the begin stack. But the reason I built that adapter was because I wanted to build an adapter, basically. So I built it for that one. I built the begin one. And they've kind of become blessed and internal and supported by us, but it's just a factor of when Kit started, I wanted to build adapters. We want to limit the number of adapters in there as much as we can, again, because of maintenance. But we have got some plans to support those adapters in that we'll actually deploy them to the requisite providers on every commit so that we know that they work. And we'll run some rudimentary tests, perhaps. There's an issue discussing this right now, so feedback is welcome on that. But yeah, we don't want to have like loads of adapters because it just becomes a bit nightmarish.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of issues, what kind of issues are still to be discussed or figured out other than this particular one?
The GitHub issues are a good sort of indicator to the things we're discussing. One thing that's been currently discussed is the middleware thing. So people are obviously quite tied to middleware. SvelteKit's goal is to be completely serverless, like serverless first, where you can build for server full environment if you want to. These are kind of at odds, obviously, because middleware is a concept not at the adapter layer. It's more in the application. So there's a discussion now about how we handle a middleware type pattern, where the middleware, and this is a view that I share with Rich, is that the middleware pattern that's being kind of influenced by Express is not a very good pattern. It's just not. It looks like a hack, and I've always hated Express, but I've hated Express for the same reason.
Should this have been your unpopular opinion?
I mean, it could be like that's not a bad one actually. I hate Express. I'm just going to say that, and it's mostly because of the request format, right? I don't like it, but it is like the de facto standard. It doesn't fit in with serverless because it doesn't really use that kind of middleware pattern. It's kind of a raw handler.
So yeah, sounds like a hard problem to solve.
It is, and it's been a discussion that I've seen for the last couple of days in the maintainers channel. Like, how are we going to solve this problem, right? So there's people who are very much want to deploy on server full platforms, which is totally kind of within the bounds of what SvelteKit does, but we haven't made any special accommodations for doing that yet. And I think the other one actually is maybe a personal thing with me that I don't know, because I haven't had that much time to actually play with SvelteKit apart from writing as adapters. I've noticed that the way you install dependencies now, and I think it's due to Vite, it is very different to the way you did it in Sapper. So in Sapper, everything was dev and everything got bundled, and you've got a bundled server and a bundled front end. Kit doesn't seem to do that. So when you install prod dependencies, you still need them there. So when you install dependencies, sometimes you put them as prod and you need them still there when you're actually running the application because the handlers don't bundle those dependencies. I don't know whether that's something that the adapters should be doing. I don't know whether it's something that Kit should be doing. If we want to do it at all, I don't know. So there's things like that I guess will just be a learning path and probably go in the FAQs.
I have some questions. I feel like, we may have skipped through, obviously people should read the docs, but I just wanted to do some introductions of like high level concepts. I think a lot of things ported over pretty nicely from Sapper. And there is a migration doc specifically for people moving from Sapper to SvelteKit, which I quite appreciated. I think there's some new concepts though, right? There is some very fancy route matching of like some logic of like if you request a route, this is kind of like the resolution logic that kind of goes on there. There is a concept of a session, which maybe came from Sapper, but I'm just not very familiar what a session is. And I was just, wanted to step through some of the big concepts that you think might be relevant to discuss on SvelteKit.
Yeah, so I mean, with those two in mind specifically, so the route matching thing is in Sapper, obviously file system routes are defined by their file name. So parameters are defined by putting brackets in there, and you can do some sort of rudimentary regex. It has its limitations. We don't want to move away from file system routing, but we would want to make it a bit more powerful than it currently is. So there are some experiments, I would call them experiments right now. What do we break? And it's very rich again. What do we break if we do this? Rather than, if we might break things, it's more like we're going to do it and what are we breaking here and how can that be worked around? So the idea being to enhance regex matching a bit so you can have more dynamic routes. And there's already a pretty angry Svelte Reddit thread on it, I believe, that I've been replying in. Yeah, well, about it breaks IntelliJ, so therefore it's a bad thing. And my responses on there have been basically, that's not how we work. Like, if your tooling can't cope, don't use the tooling, right? And I like it, IntelliJ. I think it's a fantastic tool. But, everything has limitations. And if it has limitations with file names, then let's fix IntelliJ. Let's not cripple our own output. Let's not stop us having features that we want or we think are valuable because tool XYZ that 10% of people use, or even if it's 90% of people use, can't cope with it. As long as the underlying file systems on Linux and Windows and Mac can handle it, then it should be a candidate for something we include. So I think the goal is to make that regex a bit more powerful than it is, so that you can do some pretty cool stuff with it. And the other thing, Sean, you mentioned, it's kind of
session stuff, I think?
Sessions. Am I supposed to, what am I allowed to do with that? That sounds very powerful.
Well, so the session store in Sapper was just a regular session store. It's just a regular store, right, that you can populate as part of your server. You can precede it from the server. It's special in that it's a server-side store that you can populate, which will then appear in your client without any extra effort. And the idea was it handles stuff that lives in your browser as long as you're within the bounds of the SPA and you're clicking around. If you refresh that session store, again, needs to be preceded from the server side. So if you're going to put something in that session store in Sapper and you don't do it at the server side, or you don't worry about it at the server side, then it's going to get cleared if you refresh or something else happens. Now, what's changed in the Kit version, I couldn't really tell you. What I can say is it's a bit more, it's getting a bit more use than the one in Sapper did. The one in Sapper had some pretty obvious omissions, I believe, that it should have been used for. It wasn't as powerful as we wanted, and so the Kit one is now properly usable for authentication and stuff like that. So that's the changes that I know is that we're kind of formalizing it and deciding what it is based on feedback. Whether it's a finished spec yet, I don't know, and how different it is to what was in Sapper, I also don't know, unfortunately.
The reason it jumps out at me is typically you don't do sessions with serverless, right? If the whole premise of SvelteKit was to move to serverless, then sessions is a bit unusual. Begin does actually have concept of sessions that is pretty easy to use, but I don't think the other platform providers support that very easily, and you would have to wire up something special on the back end. I don't know. I haven't thought this through. It just jumped out at me as like, hey, serverless, we don't really do sessions here.
Yeah. So again, it was easy with Sapper to build a stateful application, although I'd always recommend against building a stateful application. The session, again, it's like it exists in the server, but really it's not something we would say is persisted. It's not something where you should store the user's authentication. It's more where you store a kind of a token or something that says they're authenticated, like a flag almost. And then your state is managed by JWT or something else that's designed for authentication in a stateless application. So yeah, it's a weird naming. It's more akin to like a browser session, I would say, than a server-side authentication session. It's like a session store in your browser, right? That's also called session, but it's not really a session. It's a session within your browser.
As if things are not confusing enough.
Yeah, right.
So there's this thing called setup in the documentation, where I think you can do stuff like does seem to do something with sessions.
So because I've not seen the setup method at all actually, but I would assume that that's equivalent to what we had in Sapper before, which was the
server.js file.
Yeah, and the client.js file. So it's where you can pre-seed these stores from your server side. So my cookies, for example, are not readable from the browser. They only exist in the server. They're not readable from the browser. They only exist as HTTP only secure cookies. So the only thing that can read them is the browser itself. So I have to read those cookies in the server side. So I assume that's probably the same thing. That setup has access to those cookies that aren't readable by JavaScript effectively.
Yeah, that does look like something like that.
I've got more. What's the dollar signs?
Dollar signs. So this is a weird one. Yeah,
it's very.
This is a weird one because the dollar's been used to kind of demarcate internal stuff, right? And I think it still does. So the dollar is saying that something is kind of a concept of kit rather than something the user should be defining. And we've tended to use double dollars for kind of more internal concerns as well. So it's a weird one, and I don't know what the decision process was behind it, but historically Rich has been very against aliases. So all this kind of roll-up plugin alias, I think it's called, and the Webpack equivalent.
Oh yeah, I think I remember a discussion about because that was a thing in Sapper, right? You imported like from source
node modules.
What was it? Yeah, and people got really, really upset about that.
Yeah, and they're saying, why don't you use aliases? And the reason the logic is sound, right? We already have an aliasing system built into Node, into JavaScript, which is node modules, the node modules resolution algorithm. So why not leverage that? It makes a lot of sense. It's a weird one because people have very much in their minds tied node modules to being part of NPM, and it's not. But yeah, so that was logical then, and it's still logical now. But I think it started when we were using Snowpack. Snowpack is very heavy on aliases and mount points, and I think they're unavoidable because of the way that Snowpack is actually structuring your application. Because it's in dev, it's not loading from a bundle. It's not pre-bundling. It's just loading stuff off your file system. So kind of everything becomes an alias at that point.
Is that the same in Vite?
Well, yeah. So I think it's the same sort of thing. It's not quite as explicit as Snowpack was, but everything obviously is still loaded off your file system. It's all virtual in the browser, the virtual paths. So mount points are kind of implicit, and so therefore it makes kind of sense to use them. So I think we've now gone to the point where we call it aliasing it's aliasing with a good reason, because we literally can't use the module require system. I don't know the exact reasons behind it, but that's what I understand. So yeah, the dollar things are just named repositories of files. So like components, or we call it $lib now because it's not necessarily components in there. So having a default one called $components seemed like a misleading thing.
Yeah. I think Routify also uses dollar for example, for the layout files.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
I think it's just it's nice.
I think Raspberry does some magic with a dynamic. It builds a dynamic routing thing in a folder somewhere, and then it gets bundled at the end. So again, that's a good reason for a mount point, right? Because it's not something real at the time of dev.
Right. Yeah. But it is real, or is it?
I don't know why I said the time of dev and not dev time.
Time of dev.
It felt good because like we're talking about things that aren't really real. You know, it's like the time of dev. It's like Game of Thrones stuff.
It's when you go to work. It's time of dev.
Time of dev. It is.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a bit about the Svelte Radio website, and I've been tinkering around with it for the last few weeks, and it's been horribly broken, and then working, and then horribly broken. So now I'm talking about the SvelteKit version. So I've been like using I think SvelteKit since version maybe 20, like the next 20 version. Now it's at like 50 something. It's at 60 maybe. And it's been getting more and more stable. I remember in the beginning I had a lot of issues, but now it's been working pretty well. It's a lot of fun to build with. There are some like kinks that you have to figure out. But yeah, it's been great. It's going to be great to release it as well.
I've started building my potential summit talk. I say potential because who knows if I have time or not, but my potential summit talk in Kit. And yeah, like the development experience now is pretty straightforward. If you want to build an application, it's a couple of commands and you're done. The thing I've run into, the thing I mentioned before about dependencies, I've still got to figure out what exactly that is and how that works. Because I'm using, I tend to use some of these libraries which are very much CommonJS. And obviously Vite is very ESM focused and Kit is very ESM focused. So you're going to find some issues when you're trying to import CommonJS libraries. There's no amount of plugins and rollup plugins that can actually fix every CommonJS library. But the ones I've imported there, ESM, have worked pretty well, sort of out of the box. So yeah, there'll be kinks. There'll be things we just need to document that maybe are more obvious to us and not obvious to everyone else.
For sure. So the thing I've been missing from Routify is the concept of all the like the helper functions that are in Routify. I don't know if you've actually seen those.
I've seen a couple of them, around routing.
So it's actually so it's basically just like getting the current page or the parent page or stuff like that, which is pretty nice. I don't know if that's possible or even something that you want to have in the actual SvelteKit router as a feature.
Well, there was discussion around this. We've still got the page store, the dollar page store, and there's a few people who just are just very happy with the dollar page store and .split, right? Split by /.
Yeah.
Now, there are also a bunch of people who think that we should have more of an object structure for how that works. So you can still access all that stuff, which is great, but you also get access to perhaps an object which contains the individual components of that URL, how to call parts and all that sort of stuff, and what's a segment and what's a subpath and everything else, how to handle parameters. That's kind of all undecided, but I think it's an idea we're toying with of how to improve that so that it's kind of easy to access without having to do your own splitting. But at the same time, it's also it's that delicate balance between making something all singing, all dancing, and making something just raw and simple, so it's easy to understand and predictable, and you can do what you need to do in your own way, because it's kind of also subjective based on the person implementing.
Oh, definitely.
I'll just shout out one feature which I appreciate. We don't really need to talk that much about it, but there's a SvelteKit prefetch attribute that is new, I think, and I think it's just an easy thing to tack onto any anchor links to increase the perceived performance, and it's just a great addition. So people should definitely check that out. And it's not like a banner feature of SvelteKit, but it's just a really nice thing to have.
It's like one of those small useful things.
It actually works in two ways as well. So it works for mobile because there's actually a slight delay between you touching a link and opening a link on a mobile. It doesn't immediately open that link when you touch it. So Prefetch even tries to start loading the page the moment your finger touches the screen, which is pretty cool.
Ah, right. That sounds like, what's the thing in isn't that a Ruby on Rails thing that was released years ago?
Possibly. Yeah,
Turbo?
very possibly.
Yeah.
Turbo links or something?
No. Hotwire.
No, that's different.
Hotwire. Okay.
Hotwire. That makes sense.
Is this basically an action? Should we just use the action syntax rather than the...
Yeah.
I do vaguely remember a discussion around that as well, but I don't remember what the outcome was. But I think the outcome was basically it's not an action.
Oh,
All right. Yeah, fair enough. I'm sure there's a good reason. There's a rel equals external, which I don't understand. So the docs probably need some work. Do you understand this? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Yeah, okay.
No, I don't understand it per se, but I do know there's a difference. So if you link to, if you mark an internal URL as external, it will actually reload the page when you click it, I believe. If you mark an external URL as external, I remember not doing it, and I think something might have broken when I did that. I had some weird. So I had some weird. That's what it was, I think. Right. So I have on my main domain, I have some aliases like URL rewrites that are in Vercel. So they look like part of the application, but they're not part of the application. So if I don't mark those links as external, Sapper thinks they're part of the application because it's using, single page application routing, and it will try and load it by doing an internal routing, but it's not part of the application. Right. So if I've got example.com blah, it's not part of the application. It points to some other application. Sapper sees that link. It's like, that's an internal link. I'll write that into my router.
I'll break everything.
And it will break everything, right? Yeah, that's what happened. That's what it was. That's what it was. And it was quite, it seems very odd because why can't Sapper just handle that? But I think in order for Sapper to determine if it's external or internal would add a delay anyway. So it's probably an optimization, but it works.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that explanation made more sense than what's in the docs. So we should.
Maybe it's in the docs. Yeah. I think that's reasonable. You just reminded me of one more Kit thing I should mention. That's actually quite a deviation from Sapper. Thankfully. So in Sapper, the base URL is something that was set at build time. This means that you can't build a site that will be able to be hosted on, not subdomains because that works, but subpaths. Right. So we have a lot of providers that want /experiences with experiences underneath, and we can't do it right now. So the idea with Kit is we're going to make it into potentially an environment variable. So you can pass it in at runtime. So you can pass it in your environment. And I think this is actually also essential for IPFS support. I wrote a very rudimentary IPFS adapter. It's just a node adapter with an extra line. It's very simple, which is quite cool. But I never put it in the code base because it's just something to maintain that we don't need. However, it uses subpaths as part of its build process, I think. And so, and they're dynamically generated. So you can't, you don't know what that's going to be at build time. So yeah, it's certainly it's in the issues. It's one of our things that we're going to make a dynamic base path. And I think that'll be welcomed by a lot of people, especially me.
Isn't that also a thing for internationalization? I think it's usually something that people.
There's a lot more complexity to it than just having a subpath. There's been a lot of discussion on the issue on Sapper. Hopefully we can take some of that on board and make it, a thing that's really workable for SvelteKit. But I don't know in depth to say whether this solves it or not.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm pretty interested in internationalizing the docs because Svelte has a pretty decent global community and there's some energy there. Yeah. If we let them loose, just translating things, I think it would increase the adoption in various countries. And that was a big move for Vue when they internationalized for China.
Yeah.
Which actually brings us to there may be a spin-off project to write docs, which is something I suggested.
Interesting.
Well, no, for you. We talked about this.
Oh, did we?
Yeah.
My memory's shot.
For SvelteKit docs, there's you essentially have to build a static site generator for docs. And I was like, why don't we just extract this and then make this the default docs tooling for all Svelte projects, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we're doing. The sites repository is exactly that. There's some more work to do to build an API for it. Now, I'm not going to guarantee that this provides an easy route to an international I-18N. And the reason that it doesn't is because it's not so much about the willingness of volunteers, it's the maintenance of such. If we have docs in multiple languages, there's a real burden of maintenance on the individual contributors to those docs to keep them in line with what we've written. If we have outdated docs in China that say the wrong thing, we're not going to know about that because we don't read Chinese, right? We don't read any of these languages. And so it's a huge problem for us in that, we're fearful that we'll bless something, we'll have something official that isn't correct and true. So the real thing is, how do we ensure that the maintenance is going to be optimal? We can't guarantee any of these contributors that are doing it that they'll not lose interest after a month and disappear. So yeah, it's a huge sort of more like a logistical problem than anything else. And it's certainly not for lack of wanting to have translations. It's more maintenance,
it's not easy.
Contributors. It's difficult to do that, I guess. Actually,
I was just going to say, I could imagine that dedicated tool that sort of draws as a data source from the English version, and then has a translation that's true of as of a certain hash, and all the subsequent hashes, all the subsequent edits that come in, you could sort of display them and say, like, these have not been translated yet, and anyone who comes along can help to patch it up if they want to, or if they can read the translated version up to a certain point in time and then see the diffs in English.
Yeah, and I think it's a great idea. It's complex.
There has to be like tools for this, right?
As far as I know, no one does this. It's just kind of very, very manually translated by by dedicated community members, and it's not. Yeah. It's just not very good. But something's better than nothing.
Maybe the org could use some of the open collective money if we could find like a company that solves this problem. That might be worth using money for.
It's possible, yeah. It's possible. That's probably not a bad way to spend it, actually. Might be worth
I don't
raising.
know if there are any companies like that, but...
I mean, there's got to be translation companies, right?
Yeah, but I meant more like the actual infrastructure around it, because you kind of need the expertise of using Svelte to actually understand what the meaning of the docs are sometimes. You
do. So one interesting thing, so I think for the Russian translation, because the Russian translation actually exists on our domain, and it's maintained by the guy who wrote Tinro, so Alex. So he's written a GitHub webhook, I think, that receives every single change we make to the docs repository and pings him to retranslate it. Now, again, there's still a dependency on him to then translate every single one of those that come through. But that's certainly a step in the right direction if there was, say, a way of collecting these up so that community members could translate and then people could approve them, maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Well, cool. There's a lot more that we haven't touched upon, but
sure.
This is
more episodes.
This is an incredible project. The community has been very excited about it, and congratulations on shipping a public beta.
Thanks. Thanks, community.
All right. So, unpopular opinions?
Yeah. Shall I go first?
Yes, go for it.
So this is said with a bit of jest, but it's just caused me a lot of pain, and it always does cause me a lot of pain. Daylight savings time should be abolished. There is actually a protest somewhere. It's been going a long time, a petition sort of thing, to actually abolish it. I'm not sure I like it, because I do quite enjoy having that extra hour and having more light in the day, especially in often dreary England. But yeah, just as a kind of stamp my foot, have my pitchfork, whatever, I think daylight savings time should be abolished.
What if we went further and so to complete that thought, I actually recently learned that daylight savings time actually kills people, because if you have a timer somewhere, whether it's like a heart pacer or like a traffic light that's just gonna off or whatever, people die from it, and there are documented cases in the US at least. So people are trying to get rid of I think they call it ditch the switch, and there's momentum at the state level. 2 out of the 50 states don't have DST, and about 13 more states are trying to remove it, but you have to get congressional approval, and Congress is not doing anything. Yeah, I know. So the more aggressive version of this is just get rid of time zones, right? Like, what if everyone was just on the same 24-hour clock and we just on GMT or whatever?
That would be great.
That would mean that certain countries are just in darkness all the time.
That would be so nice.
No, you just have different norms, right? Like, I mean, there was a time before time zones, and what if there was a time after time zones?
Yeah, you would just be on Sean clock, right?
Well, GMT it'd be very favorable to Europe.
Yeah, that's true. All right.
Yeah. Anyway,
what's your unpopular opinion, Sean?
Facebook has good features, and I miss them.
Ridiculous.
So
you need to elaborate here. Why are you missing them, and why?
I wanted an old photo of myself. Twitter doesn't keep old profile pictures.
Yeah.
Gmail doesn't keep old profile pictures. The only one that does is Facebook. GitHub doesn't keep old profile pictures. So you want to time travel? The only thing you can do is go to Facebook, and yeah, Facebook. They did some social media right. Yeah. I asked this question on Twitter, and the other top thing that a lot of people miss is pokes. Like, you just randomly poke everybody.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Really?
Those were the days. I love poking people.
So we should bring back pokes. And then, like, once you start down this path, then you're like, actually, Facebook wasn't all bad,
Yeah, it definitely became bad over time, didn't it?
Kind of what happens when you gotta squeeze all the money out of your users in
fun
some
fact,
way.
I've actually been fired for updating a Facebook status before.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. It was a relationship status because I was a RA in college, and then I started dating one of my residents, which you're not supposed to do, of course. And it wasn't supposed to be like a public announcement or anything, but like,
oh no,
I just was randomly toying with it. I don't know what I was thinking, but I just randomly clicked and then made that relationship public. Like, everyone was cool with it. It wasn't official. But once it was Facebook official, then the administration got involved, and then we had to do things. But it was a really funny situation.
That's crazy, huh?
All right, my unpopular opinion: Clubhouse isn't as fun as it used to be, or rather, isn't as fun as I hoped it would be. I haven't used it in a while. Maybe that's on me, though. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't know. I haven't
likewise.
used it in a while. Sorry, Sean.
Likewise, there was even discussion about having like a Svelte Society Clubhouse, and I think that's kind of gone. It was pretty hot in February, and then as these things do, they do tend to die off. But this has happened to Clubhouse before. It has been hot, and then it died, and then it came back. So we'll see what it is. I think it has value for some people, and then some people just don't vibe with it, and that's fine. I have primarily been there for the celebrities. So the moment that I found that the people that I wanted, they all record their sessions anyway on YouTube or whatever, then there's no reason to stick around a Clubhouse.
Yeah, makes sense.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah, so I mean, for me, like, I haven't used Clubhouse in ages, but I haven't done much in ages apart from work, to be fair. I guess the thing that struck me was, I mentioned on Twitter that Twitter launched Spaces, which is effectively the same thing, looks very similar. I was under the understanding that they'd cloned Clubhouse, but actually apparently they started building Spaces before Clubhouse was even conceived. So to be fair to them, like, well done. But what I will say is that Spaces already looks far more interesting. More for me because I already have a follower kind of following on Twitter. And apparently when you join one of these Spaces on Twitter, and I haven't done it yet, I haven't had time, but when you do, people flood into those chats much more quickly than they do on Clubhouse. And again, it could be about followers counts and things like that, but it could just be that it's a platform that's already on your phone and you don't need to have a separate application that sends you 400 notifications a day. Who knows?
Yeah. All right. So do we have time for picks?
Briefly, cool. I think, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead of mine. So my pick is Home Things. So I really don't like... They say it themselves, shipping water is bonkers, right? There's no need for us to ship cleaning products in massive bottles full of mostly water with a bit of cleaning products in it, right? So what Home Things does is they just ship a concentrated tablet, and you put it in just regular tap water that doesn't need shipping. And then they give you the bottles that you can reuse again and again because they're made of glass and they've got like nice nozzles and stuff on them. They've got 3 tablets, one for the bathroom, one for the shiny things, it says just literally called shiny things, and one for kind of everything else. And yeah, so they ship you the tablets in a little tiny box in recyclable packaging that's eco-friendly. I think it's compostable packaging. No water needs to be shipped. Done. And you buy the bottles once and that's it. And
this looks pretty cool.
Now it's very cool, right? But right now it's more expensive than, it's the same price as buying at the supermarket, but they're a startup. As time goes on and they get more popular, hopefully it'll go down. But yeah, the shipping, imagine how many bottles of water people just ship around the world because it's got some cleaning product deleted in it. It's just ridiculous. So yeah, I saw it on Facebook, and it's rare for a Facebook ad to actually have something of value, but it did. So there you go.
Oh no, we're becoming a pro Facebook podcast.
I mean, it's not pro. This is definitely not pro Facebook. This is a rare exception, right? A broken clock tells the right time twice a day.
That is true. All right. So Kev. My pick. Yeah. So I mentioned I've been building the Svelte Radio site, right? And so I originally started building it using Tailwind, but then I ditched Tailwind and I started using just regular old CSS. And I fallen in love with this feature of CSS called Clamp. Have you guys used it? It's like
I haven't.
Yeah, I haven't, but I heard about it. Yeah,
it's so the short is pretty much that it lets you set a minimum value and a maximum value, and then a value in between. And the whatever it is can't go above or beyond that. And I'm using it both for fonts and for spacing stuff. So it's a really nice way of building responsive designs. Basically, it's really nice.
Yeah, so responsive typography is one of those things where you used to need a bunch of tricks. I actually collected a bunch of these things. And there is some recommendation for how to do it right, because you can get it wrong. And so I'm just going to copy and paste my code snippet into the show notes here so people don't get it wrong, because apparently there's some accessibility issues if you do get it wrong. Okay, well, anything else? You want to talk about custom properties?
No. So I'm using it in combination with custom properties to do some fun stuff.
But does it work in IE11, which is dying in August, by the way?
I don't really care, honestly.
Well, I'm tracking the slow death of IE11, and I really, really think this is the year. I think this is the year the US government might drop IE11. It's coming really, really quickly.
Famous last words?
WordPress is dropping it. WordPress.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that will kill it for sure, right?
Yeah.
Well, they kill it for content sites, but the reason people stick around with IE11 is for their enterprise legacy apps and all that. So anyway, last one, mine, which is Smashing Magazine's Complete Guide to Accessible Front-End Components. I've always wanted something like this. It previously was available as a book, and now it's just available as a free guide. So you no longer have an excuse if you're implementing one of these things. Just stop by here, make sure that you're checking all the accessibility boxes, copy and paste some code, and then you're good.
That's good cool. I need to use this for Svelte Radio.
I've actually had a dream of building a component kit for myself in Svelte and Tailwind, because I like Tailwind, and people just copy and paste, and you just have a good base, and I think it'd be a nice thing to open source. So it's a dream. I haven't done it yet.
Just need a little bit more time in the day. All right, so that's us
cool.
This time. Yeah, I guess that's
Go play SvelteKit.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Do it.
Try it out. All right. Bye.
Bye.